Hi, this is Paul. I am going to let you know what's been going on Twitter. Now, if you're not on Twitter and you don't follow me on Twitter, by no means should this video sort of make you go there and do it, because the signal to noise on Twitter is a particularly tricky thing, and so this is not an endorsement of Twitter or to tell you to stay away from it. But a number of months ago, T. Grogan hopped from YouTube to Twitter. And it sort of reminded me in like one of the later Matrix sequels when Agent Smith sort of jumped from the Matrix into Neo's other world. That was sort of like T. Grogan coming to Twitter, because he was just always on me. And T. Grogan is on me in the way that T. Grogan's always on me. And it's not particularly bothersome or annoying or anything. It's just what Tim does. And so basically, he just continues to try to say things like, well, you're a Christian Reformed minister, and when I read stuff in John Calvin and the Christian Reformed Church, and you don't seem to say that on YouTube, then and it's like, then what? Then I'm not a Christian Reformed minister? I still clearly am. Then I shouldn't be a Christian Reformed minister? Well, maybe not, but I don't think any synod or classis or local congregation is going to necessarily kick me out and take T. Grog's word for it. And he's not trying to. I mean, he's not being malicious or anything like that. But it's just the same game he keeps playing, which is, of course, sort of what launched. Oh, so I played some of the. I played some of the branding.
Previously on Game of Trolls.
You're not empathizing with me.
Now we all know the rules of the Game of Trolls, so without further ado, our first contestant needs no introduction. He's a feature, not a bug. A perennial guest in every Christian home. The personification of Sam Harris's revenge. The village corner atheist. I give you the T. Grogan Experience.
The T. Grogan Podcast, check it out!
The T. Grogan Experience.
Utah by day, T. Grogan by night, all day!
I'm interested in TLC because I really don't understand what it's all about.
I see a lot of very incoherent things being said here. Everybody nods their head to and say, wow, that's profound, man.
It's like Seinfeld. It's a show about nothing.
Back in the bad old days, those people would have been locked up in asylums.
Song is, I like tangerines, do you know what I mean? No, explain it further.
Thank you for that rousing left brain deconstruction, Mr. Chad. And with that, we begin our monthly rankings. Coming in at number 4, no surprise here, we have the T. Grogan Experience.
But our brains are still back in the Stone Age.
And number 3, this is also going to be, I'm actually showing it's Mr. Steve McGee.
What do you have to say, Steve? Do you have a stable signal? Steve, you're always having difficulties.
Okay, and for these final 2, ladies and gentlemen, this was a toss-up. I really just threw the cards up in the air and tried to see which magnet stuck on what. And for this, I'm giving the number 2 spot to Chad the Girl Dad. And our number one, ladies and gentlemen, we have Peter Penrose.
I like tangerines.
So that concludes our segment today on the Game of Trolls. And if you like this segment, please leave a comment below. And who knows, your comment might be sufficient to garner your own participation on next month's Game of Trolls.
The Game of Trolls that Worldly News tonight had done, just sort of playing with it. And so then, I felt bad. I muted him for a while, which cut down about half of his tweets. And then after my clip, when I talking to Jordan Hall, then he was sort of going after Jordan Hall, saying, Hall is lying about his background because Tim can't find him in a particular list of Harvard graduates. And so then it's like, Jordan Hall is working this grift in the TLC towards what end? I mean, if Jordan Hall was working a grift in the TL, first of all, he wouldn't bother with us because for the most part, we're really too small to make anybody much money or fame. And Jordan Hall has much more famous friends than us. And so, and T. Grog would be, well, how do you know Jordan Hall has more famous friends than us? And it's like, well, I don't know. That's sort of the sense I have. And if, I've been grifted by all sorts of people over the years, mostly not online, mostly just in real person, like drug addicts and homeless people. And I mean, I've gotten taken all the time, and usually not for a lot of money. But, $20 here and $20 there, well, fair enough. If I'm wealthy enough that I can absorb such losses. And so he was just sort of continuing to make those kind of noises on Twitter. And it's like, oh, so then I finally, and this is how it goes with me and people. And I made the comment the other day about telemarketers, because usually I'll just sort of not talk to telemarketers, but every now and then one will catch me unawares, and I will say, no, thank you. And then they'll persist a little bit harder, and I'll say, no, really, no, thank you. And then if they keep pushing, then the troll comes out. And when the troll comes out, other things happen. Like there's one case where this woman this was back when the church had a phone line, and this woman called on behalf of some Christian ministry, and I said, no, thank you. And she says, she just wouldn't let it go. And so then I told her what I actually thought about a whole bunch of things. And then she didn't know what to say, and apparently she hung up on me. And she was crying to her supervisor, and her supervisor called me back and said, what kind of a minister are you? You're making her cry. I said, look, lady, I told her no thank you. I told her no thank you at least 3 times, and she still persisted to want to, for the guise of marketing, to get me to answer her questions. So I did. And these things happen every now and then, and this is always what makes me laugh, because again, I sort of have the reputation, and I've had it in the corner of Paul's too nice. And it's like, Paul's too nice up to a certain point, and then you basically signal to me that, okay, we're done with the nice level of our relationship, and now we're going to be into the clarity level of our relationship, and I'll tell you what I really think. So basically, Tim pushed me to the point of saying, okay, Tim, let me tell you what I really think. And so I basically gave him a little story. I said, in many ways, what you want to do, Tim, with all of your, let's check all the details. And then he was talking to someone else on Twitter, and I was part of that stream, and he was saying, I just really want to talk about the Bible, and I just really want to get down to the nuts and bolts of the Bible. And of course, Tim wants to get down to the nuts and bolts of the Bible, because this is sort of the foundationalist dream that if we can get down to all of the bottom, then if I show you with facts and logic, then I win the argument, then you stop being what? A Christian? And to me, it reminded me of this great moment where John and Jonathan basically lay something out that I think many of us intuitively have sort of felt for a while.
in the university. Now, here's the important point that I'm going to use Callard to make. The desire, okay, so a proper part of being rational is the imperative to be more rational, right? So rationality is an inherently aspirational entity, which means at the heart of rationality is aspiration and transformative experience, which requires ritual, because ritual is imaginal, serious play. And this goes to
that's really it's just funny because just with that you completely undermine the entire project of rationalism.
Yeah.
You know, because that's true. I'd never thought about it because you want to be reasonable.
Yes.
Reason becomes aspirational and therefore has to be. You have to kind of imagine and project yourself into that space before you enter into it, because why would you desire it if you couldn't imagine yourself in a future state where you have to move towards that future state through imagination?
And notice, by the way, notice you're gesturing, you're right, and you're using perspectival and participatory knowing.
Yeah.
Right. What's it like to be that person, and who will I be? What will the agent arena relationship be like when I am that person? And you know, this goes to very formal arguments from people at the core of like computational psychology. Like you can't, but I won't get into the details, but if I'm in a weaker logic, like predicate calculus, and I'm trying to get to a stronger logic, modal logic, and what stronger means, I can grasp more of reality with the logic. I can represent more. There's nothing I can do, and I can run all the possible logical permutations, and I can't get from predicate logic to modal logic. I have to leap. It's an imaginal leap, and I'm gonna
And I mean, that is just such a foundational point. And, you know, I've just gone round and round with T-Grizz. And, of course, I'm just T-Grog, sorry. T-Grizz is the rapper that has never left a comment on the Freddie and Paul show that Freddie mentions all the time. So not T-Grizz, T-Grog. We have T-Grog, not T-Grizz. I'm going to have to play the branding of Freddie and Charles dancing, because Freddie was pleading on me today. Please play the branding. And I'd like to say, Freddie, right now the channel isn't doing particularly well. I mean, we don't have that many. We've the last couple months have hardly any new subscribers, and videos aren't performing very well. And so I think Freddie's dreams are being dashed by my poor performance as a YouTuber. But you know, this isn't just about T-Grog. I mean, part of the reason T-Grog came into the corner with such a splash was that it was like, oh, wow. You know, it's like 1999 all over again, 1999 all over again. And he's always like, well, we should have like experts and PhDs saying stuff. And it's like, well, John Vervaeke has a PhD. John Vervaeke's an expert. John Vervaeke is very well received at the University of Toronto, but no, not that PhD or expert. My PhD or my expert over here that says the kinds of things I want. And the whole point that they made about aspirational is that there is in the mind of these people this vision that if we have the experts, if we have the PhDs, if we have the facts and logic, if we have the reason, then the clouds will part. The Red Sea will turn to dry land, and everyone will go out and be reasonable. And of course, if you read, I was looking at a Ryan Burge post. And Ryan Burge does these religion and graphs thing that he has on Substack. You know, basically the number of atheists hasn't moved at all. For all of new atheism, yeah, a lot of people left church, but they, as Clay Rutledge, I mean, it's so funny because they're always wanting to talk facts and logic, and it's like the data has always been, I mean, and this is the kind of data they like. They have ostensibly way more faith in that data than I have in data. And all of the data says, all of the facts and logic stuff, it doesn't make that much of a difference. It doesn't change people. Sure, they might have left the church, but now they're into crystals. Or they're, you know, doing all these other, waiting on aliens. And, all of the data is there. But what's so funny is the people that keep yelling about the data and the facts, they don't seem to look at the data and the facts, which doesn't bother me because I'm not the one with the faith in the data and the facts like they are. And so, and it isn't to say that the data and the facts don't mean anything. So I basically I started this thread and I said, look, T-Grog, a basketball game, and it's a good one, and it is a good one, and I like basketball too.
It's supposed to indicate that Jesus.
And Alex O'Connor is debating David Wood, and they've got and they're talking about the Bible, and they're putting Bible verses up, and we're having facts and logic and all of these things. And hey, I've been watching this. I like it. My friend Glenn Scrivener is covering it carefully, and Gavin Ortland is covering it carefully, and they're walking through it, and they're pointing out things, and and it's all fun. It's all fun, and it's helpful. I learn things from these things. I learn things I didn't know before, and it kind of goes into the stew. And I like Alex O'Connor, and I actually like Alex O'Connor a little bit better than I like David Wood, because, and it was so funny in the comments, of course, on the phone, one of the people said something like about, he didn't like David Woods because those Christians are so arrogant. And it's like, Glenn Scrivener basically made this point in a previous video. It's like, well, back in the 90s, it was the time for the atheists to be arrogant. And now the atheists are just sort of they've kind of sensed the vibe shift, and they're just a little bit more meek and a little more tentative and a little bit more winsome. And the Christians are all, more atheist, and they're mocking and they're disclaiming. And, Glenn Scrivener says a funny thing with respect to this video. He says, I actually kind of think Alex won the debate because he basically had an unprovable thing to try to prove. And so in that way, in terms of performance, Alex won. But again, this is Glenn Scrivener, who clearly believes that Jesus claimed to be God. So, what I liken this to T-Grog is that this kind of YouTube, this kind of game, is a basketball game. And there's a lot of dunking in basketball, and it's interesting that that's sort of the mimetic equivalent of that. But the funny thing about dunks in basketball, they're still only worth 2 points. In other words, a layup and a dunk, or like a really, a mid-range shooter that you really had to move around just to hit, they're all worth 2 points. And so basketball's fun. You can dunk in basketball, you can shoot 3-pointers, you can do all this stuff in basketball. That whole facts and logic and debate and proving and the Bible, that whole game that I keep saying to T-Grog, this is the game you want to play, T-Grog. It's still out there on YouTube. Just go play with them. Just leave a comment. But of course, the attraction for many people in this crazy little group of people that we have is that we actually have a little community. And this aspirational thing that people have towards the facts and logic, why doesn't it play there? Well, part of the reason it doesn't play there is that whole imaginary is just in the abstract. And in many cases, we have to wait until someone is at the status of Alex O'Connor or David Wood or Glenn Scrivener. And, Glenn, not to say anything against my friend Glenn, but he's sort of, not high status, but mid status. And in that airy, uppermost monarchical vision land of pure theory, they don't care what Tim thinks. They really don't. And what sort of makes the little corner fun, even though some of us still like playing basketball. Sam said it really well, that what's cool about this are the personal relationships. And so I basically liken, because I used hockey in a previous video, like playing musical instruments while we skate around playing hockey. That's kind of what we're doing in the corners. We're sort of musical instruments playing around, skating, and we're sort of keeping score. Maybe it's like Little League soccer, but are we really keeping score? And is it really the goals that matter? Because hockey players skating around with musical instruments, well, that's just kind of crazy. I should pause here and drop Sam's video in here.
Back to Durkheim, I think what his work says is we really like feeling things together. We feel most fully human when we feel things together. And there's a bit in Oliver Burkeman's book about all the studies around this, like our heart rate sync up, and then there's a dopamine release. Like, it makes us feel good when we feel things with other people. We feel less alone because we're interconnected. And healthy spiritual practice, like when churches are working, they are forms of collective emotional processing. We go and we feel sad and we lament, and then we go and we celebrate and we like find our steadiness again. And then we can go back out into the world and be steady people. But we don't have that now. And I'm wondering if what's happening in the collective outrage is we want to feel anything with anyone. And if anger's all there is, we will do it. But that helps no one self-regulate, and therefore no one come to a kind of more healthy emotional and spiritual life.
Yeah. And I think that really is part of the draw for conferences like the ones that we're hosting. I still remember that feeling in, like, say, early 2016 when Jordan Peterson was doing his biblical series. And I'm looking at these videos. I'm like, this has 1 million views. Where are the 1 million people? That's bigger than the largest football stadium I've ever been in. But is it you? I want to stand up in my giant cubicle office space and be like, surely if there's 1 million people, at least one of them, there's at least one other person in here that's hearing what I'm hearing. But how do I have that feeling of, collective interest and excitement of what I'm listening to? And I think that is a lot of what this little corner is sort of. I feel like we are trampling down social media with social media, right? We are fighting YouTube with YouTube, fighting the internet with the internet, and using
the judo guys.
Right. We're using the powers of darkness against itself. We will not be isolated. We will not be turned into consumers. We will have our interpersonal community, and we will make the content that for ourselves and each other that we would like to listen to. And we know the person behind the channel, and they know us, and we leave a comment in the comment section. It's not just some angry screed. It's hopefully they recognize and remember our name. But that doesn't mean that it always works. It's not.
I mean, the difference between the comments under Paul's videos and the comments on some of the videos I've been in are very different.
Yeah. And,
also, I'm going to eat some nuts. I hope you don't mind.
Go for it. And it's because if you are showing up in the same place repeatedly, a reiterated interaction is much more likely to go better than a one-off anonymous interaction. And if I say something mean to Paul or in response to one of the other people in Paul's comment sections, well, I might see them again, quote unquote, in the next video or the video after that, or they might show up in my comment section or whatever. And that helps bring something more like a healthy social environment where you feel accountable and you want to, be friendly, make good impressions, critique lightly and gently as low as possible and stuff like that. But what exactly unites it is then a bigger and unclear question. And what exactly is the uniting? Like, it does feel like, this little corner and other parts of the internet have like a spirit to them in the way that Paul will talk about school spirit. And that's sort of what I mean. Like, when we show up in person, it feels like we can go deeper, faster, even if I've never met you or if I've just seen your screen name underneath the video before. And because we have all of the shared context and shared sort of spirit, whereas I might not share that spirit with other people. But what's sort of generating that spirit? What is that spirit? How is it managed? How is it kept healthy? How is it kept oriented towards the Holy Spirit? What exactly is the Holy Spirit? We sort of say I mean, thinking of the Holy Spirit as the thing that sort of collectively unites Christendom, I think is a fair thing to say. But even then, Christendom, that's a complicated word to use, right? Maybe not Christianity. Those who follow Jesus, I don't know, whichever one of those words. I'm trying to mean them synonymously, but I know that they're different. Anyway, those are the thoughts that are swirling in my head.
It's not really Sam's video, it's the video that the three of us are talking. And so then, part of what provoked me is that I'm just doing what I usually do on Twitter, and I think Twitter should be for fun, and so I'm playing around, and so Tim will say something, and I said, well, it's sort of like we're skating around in our hockey rink, and you're over there in the basketball court, but you keep throwing basketballs at us. And, we're just so flexible where we kind of like, you're going to throw a basketball into the hockey rink. We're playing musical instruments while we're skating. It's like, all right. So then we sort of have a game of dodgeball going on. It's like he throws basketballs over and we throw the basketball back. And, but then he's getting all defensive. He's like, well, you're insulting me. It's like, I'm not insulting you. I thought we were playing dodgeball here. This is trolls playing dodgeball. That'll make a thumbnail. So then I told him, I said, well, pick what game you want to play. Because if you really want to play basketball with the dunks and the scores and all of that, they're still playing that game. You can still find it on YouTube and you can do all that. But that's not really so much the game that a whole bunch of us are wanting to play. We're like playing hockey with musical instruments on ice and with random, little episodes of dodgeball in the middle. But don't complain that you get hit in the face, because that's kind of what dodgeball's about. So you said, well, you got three metaphors and you got three games going. I think, yeah, that's really the way it is. And as I continued in this thread, I think via hospitality we're trying to move from a monarchical monolithic network to much more of a peer-to-peer network. And Jordan Hall and I talked about the peer-to-peer networks a little bit, and maybe I'll drop that clip in here.
Once again, what we discovered is that none of our existing designs, in principle, can actually achieve an adequate amount of collective intelligence to address the problem. And so you say, hey, we can build 12. What if we're really good with using all the things we know how to do? 20. Ah, shit, that's not even close. Re-engineer. This is where the indigenous stuff comes in, by the way. You notice that, for example, within a tight-knit, highly coherent community with tremendous intimacy, the generative problem-solving capabilities are much, much higher per person. The challenge, I'm seeing a whiteboard from like 2010. The challenge is because you can't add more people, you get this huge return until you reach the scaling limit. All right, so, and as maybe a metaphor, think about the problem of the Manhattan Project when they're trying to figure out how to actually initiate nuclear fission in an explosive way. You have to think about how to get the right ingredients. Oh, I need this blasting thing. It needs to be the right shape. Like this is basically the shape of the problem. All right. So as it turns out, this is actually quite interesting. Maybe I'll fast forward all the way to the end and see if it just lands. Wholesome community of people who are doing life together and are oriented towards, let's say, religion, is actually the correct kind of network to produce the kind of collective intelligence that can actually solve the problem. Right? It's weird. Normally you would say, well, I'm going to do the Doge thing. I'm going to do the SpaceX thing. I'm getting a whole bunch of autistic 22-year-olds and have them work 120 hours a day. And like, as it turns out, that approach is actually really good for building rocket ships. It's terrible for solving the kind of thing that we're trying to deal with. In fact, it can't help but make more of a mess of the kind of thing we're trying to deal with. Weirdly enough, as it turns out, having like pregnant women and grandmas and farmers and 4-year-olds and like 2 or 3 people who are of the kind of Doge characteristic enmeshed in a community of deep care, even though it may seem like you're wasting a lot of energy doing stuff like breaking bread and worshiping God together, this is in fact the minimum viable design constraint to produce something which, if it comes together in a larger community, which I'll have to get to in a second, can actually solve the problem. So this is where I was, by the way, back in, say, Kauai, prior to Kauai, but back in Kauai. So we were trying to figure out how to do that. But we run into the problem. You can't force communion. Communion has to actually come under a single spirit.
Right.
And if you're bringing together a bunch of heterogeneous elements, there is no actual spirit present to bring that communion together. So you end up with something which, as the amount of load that it's trying to carry goes up, it explodes.
Right.
And
the quality of the communion is dependent on the spirit that is creating it. That's not arbitrary.
Not arbitrary. This is very, very important. Yeah, absolutely. And by the way, yeah, exactly. The quality, and as a derivative of the quality, the kinds of things that will naturally come out of it, because the communion is not doing the thinking. So your preferences are not going to be as relevant. Okay. Same thing happened when we went to Ecuador. So then we come here. So this is a different way of looking at the story of me walking through the door of the church. So I walked through the door of the church, and the part of me that's been working really hard for 15 years to design what is the proper kind of group of people that can actually be the sort of the seed kernel that will allow everything else to happen is in that church, right? And this is not obvious. This is not just not obvious. This is wildly not obvious. Like, why would a simple country church in Swannanoa that has, an ordinary slice of the diversity of human beings? I can explain it to you, but it's going to take a long time to explain it to you. But the bottom line is that's what it looks like.
Right.
And so when you said, this is not the Essenes. This is actually still 100% online with what appears to be one of the things that I'm supposed to be doing, which is how do we respond to this thing? You ready for the next step?
Yep.
The next step is the reconciliation of the church. We have to find a way for the body of Christ to simultaneously be constructed of local groups that are at the right level of deep intimacy with each other and with Christ, and also includes everybody. That is the next step. If we can solve that, we're good to go.
Which, and you've read enough church history to know that
we're really bad at that.
I mean, you can start reading church history with the epistles of Paul and the and First, Second, and Third John, and that's in many ways where sort of this tension emerges, because and this is where you wind up with spirits warring, because here's the if you read the book of Daniel and you understand what these beasts in Daniel 7 that come up out of the sea are, and you understand the language of, let's say, nation and empire, which is the theme of empire in scripture is a really complex one, because it's very sort of a simple way to approach it is to say empire bad, nation good. And you can maybe read that out of Daniel 7. But you're going to really be stressed when the Son of Man descending with the clouds is given an eternal empire. So it's like, And you're right, I think. And this has been something that the church has failed at, struggled with. Jesus, of course, has this prayer in John 17 that all of his followers would be one. When, even right at the beginning, well, this really brings us back to the end of our last conversation, because this is sometimes I'll call it the problem of wineskins, and I'm just starting to stop describing it in that way, because the truth is that you can have, let's say, 6 to 8 people around a table, and like in an estuary group, you can very quickly have a common spirit that holds that little group together. And then you can, let's say, have a group of 100 or 120. And at some point, you're going to have both the dilemma of proceduralism. I think part of the swing from the Protestant Reformation was you had the tyranny of the procedure, and it swung all the way to the tyranny of the propositional. And so, it's going to have to be fully embodied, but you are going to have the communion of the Spirit. And as anybody who has ever tried to, I've watched, I continue to watch Christians work on this again and again. And the truth is, let me start communicating instead of just stop thinking. Usually what happens to your little group of people surrounded by a spirit is it gets destroyed by another group of people that has better society, and they kill you.
Yes.
And this happens. This happens at the level of spirit conflict. It happens at the level of theological, dogmatic conflict. It happens in the physical frame, and in many ways, Jesus sort of sets the menu here. And of course, it goes all the way from, let's say, the halcyon days in the book of Acts, at the end of Acts chapter 2 and Acts chapter 4, when they held their goods in common and they were of one mind, and Jerusalem was just marveling at this moment of the church. And then see, this is what's really difficult, because God can't let God is always both the purifier of this and the creator of this. And you see that, well, you might say, well, didn't they have communion at Babel? Yeah, they had communion, and the communion built a building. And God said, we're going to confuse the languages. And then you have this communion in Acts chapter 2 and Acts chapter 4, but then you have Ananias and Sapphira. And, did you, and what really bothers people about the story of Ananias and Sapphira in the book of Acts is it's such a small lie. It's such a small lie. And she drops dead, and he drops dead. And the church is terrified. And that, again, we're back at the polarity of Jesus, more demanding than we think is reasonable, because it's such a small lie. It's a tiny little lie, but more gracious than we think is responsible. And the church has continued to work out, and to struggle with that ever since.
Okay, let me throw two things in. And I think with the second, I can also tell you how the story, this piece of the story ends.
Yes.
What happens after civilization. So the first was something I've been thinking about recently, so I'll put it out there for your consideration. We have a science called network theory. And a network, by the way, is the maximally abstract representation of a set of relationships. It just has a node, which for us would normally be a person, but it could be a rock or whatever else. It's something. And then it has an edge. An edge is a content-free relationship. There's nothing in it other than the fact that relationship exists. And then you can load the edge. You can put relational qualities in it, but that's what a network is. Okay. It appears in the category of network theory, or in the discipline of network theory, that there are in fact exactly 3 fundamental topologies, or fundamental kinds of networks. You've probably heard at least 2 of these: centralized networks, decentralized networks, and distributed networks. Okay? Now, here's the proposition. The proposition is God knew that. God created it, and he knew that. And so, if he's building something, the church, which is itself at the most fundamental level about relationships between persons, then it will discover and use the potentialities that are woven into the fabric of reality, one primary one of which is the triple topology of networks, meaning that we will have a version of the church that looks very centralized, a version of the church that looks very decentralized, and a version of the church that looks very distributed. The Lord actually gave us this when he pulled a select group of followers towards him and made them into what we would call in network theory supernodes, We also call them apostles. He did this again when he said, the only true center is the Father. But for you, Peter, and by the way, James and John, beginning of a pyramid, the Petrine archetype will be representing centrality in the church. And then Pentecost. Everybody's speaking in tongues. That's right. The Spirit goes where he will. It affects the whole field in a non-centralized fashion. There's no super node. There's no particular node that is more important than any other given node. I should point out, by the way, that as I investigated this when I started thinking about the Petrine archetype, I noticed that the story of Peter started to make a lot of sense for me. Because, of course, not only is Peter called forth as being, in some sense, first among equals, but he's also the biggest jackass. And he's also the one who must, by necessity, fall away from Christ more than anybody else, except Judas. And he's the one who said, he's the one who says, you'll deny me 3 times, and does deny him 3 times, and can only be reconciled by a second coming. From my point of view, the first second coming is Christ before the boat with Peter. And I suspect this is very symbolic about the relationship with the Petrine archetype, i.e. the Catholic Church. Okay, now one more step on this one, and then I'll go to Roman numeral 2. If you ask for Vervaeke about something really interesting that we've discovered in late-stage cognitive science, and it's true in a lot of different domains, but he can speak about it quite lucidly. The human brain has discovered that the most effective way to use network theory is to have all 3 modes in a fluid dynamic relationship. Right? So the human brain can sometimes be very centralized, it can sometimes be very distributed, and it can sometimes be very decentralized. And it's constantly moving through these modes in a very subtle dance. And as it turns out, you can generalize that across most domains, maybe all, but a rich enough domain, a complex rich enough domain, that becomes true. So one might argue that the church, the body, will ultimately find a way to be able to show up in all 3 of these distinct network topologies in a fluid and still fully connected way. So a higher tone of communion that allows all 3 to be present and recognizes the strengths, weaknesses, and constraints of each, so they're mutually supporting.
And, you know, I'd say, well, if you throw basketballs on our court into the hockey rink, we'll play a little dodgeball with you, but eventually we'll probably get tired of that. We'll just probably kick the balls out into the stands and get them out of their way while we do our strange little hockey musical instrument thing here. And, or you know, we'll just get annoyed and play a little bit more dodgeball. And again, this is me telling it straight. There isn't a parable here. There isn't, well, there's sort of a parable. There is, you know, there's metaphor and all that, but it's trying to communicate what we're sort of doing, what we're sort of building. And among most of us here, there's a skepticism about the basketball paradigm. And again, the basketball is a fun game. I like basketball. I've always liked basketball. We talk about the basketball every week on the Freddie and Paul show. But what we've seen in these debates is that with this particular game of basketball, it's really tough to keep score because the score doesn't mean what you think it means. But again, that's probably not a bad analogy because in truth, in basketball, the score doesn't necessarily mean what you think it means because in any given game, maybe some team didn't really play defense or the superstar was out on injuries. And, you know, this brought me to sort of the kayfabe thing too, because Michael, I didn't even notice that Michael on his channel has really leaned into the kayfabe. And you know, our own philosophy masters man from the Bay Area, Han Shu, has been saying, well, you know, don't confuse kayfabe and logos, and fair enough with that. The nice thing would be to imagine that I can make this speech and that will resolve it, but it won't. And just like, you know, when I got upset with the telemarketer and I made her cry, I felt bad I made her cry. I didn't really want to make her cry. she just kept leaning in, and I kept wanting to say, I appreciate the fact that you need a job and you're telemarketing for this company, and all of that is fine. But when I say no, I mean no. And if you keep persisting at this, and you sort of excite the little troll in me, because, well, why would I not just hang up? Well, that's a really good, interesting question. Maybe a personal psychological question that, boy, it's too bad I banned MJ, because I'm sure he would have an answer for that, and I'm sure it would involve my need for glory and fame and the desire for me to stroke my ego, and I'm sure there's some of that involved in there too. But, as I reflected on, probably, because one of my rules on Twitter, which rules are made to have exceptions, one of my rules is I don't go back and forth. I started going back and forth with Tim because I like Tim. I really do like Tim, and I want the best for Tim. And I appreciate the fact that Tim turned his camera on and has been on a variety of channels in the corner and has, done his thing in the corner. So, I don't treat Tim like I've treated some other people in the corner who have not really at least come on to the ice to play. It was really funny. Of course, the internet is amazing.
Auf die Füße, so. Ein Pass nach vorne.
So here's American ice football. and that's sort of kind of what we're doing here. We're just playing with stuff. That's really what's going on. And so, Tim has come into the corner, and so we all liked him. We really do. But again, if we're skating and he's throwing basketballs onto the ice, we're going to throw them back. And don't really complain if we throw hard, because we like to play. And the truth is, and this is why I sort of feel bad, because in his imaginary basketball game, if I throw hard and foul him, he's like, you fouled me. But it's like, well, if you come onto the ice, you might get checked into the board. Because people in this ice rink have varying tolerances for people messing up the games that they want to play. And so checking is real. I do that, for our Canadian listeners. And most of this started in Canada, so why not use hockey? So just wanted to make this little video. And, I was listening to the great debate, and, it's fun listening to their back and forth, and it's not worthless. You can learn things here, and it is fun. But as Glenn pointed out, which is what someone else pointed out earlier, I really like and I really like Glenn's treatment of it. That apparently there was supposed to be another debate scheduled. Where's the little business of the kayfabe? I listened to the Mr. McMahon. I watched the Mr. McMahon thing in. So I guess that debate got, and David Wood said some things, and so here the kayfabe is that there's this moment that I saw in the Mr. McMahon documentary where at the end of someone's career, they broke kayfabe, and the babyface and the heel just all embraced each other. And what that did was that sort of broke open the universe even further, to the point that Vince McMahon becomes Mr. McMahon in the shows. And actually, I was, and Phlebas might be happy to hear this, because Phlebas, I don't know if it's kayfabe or if he's really disturbed by the attention that I give to the whole wrestling motif. But, I watched the Mr. McMahon documentary, and I was actually quite disturbed at the kinds of things that they were doing. And even just playing at this stuff, it's just like, ugh. Especially when he's got his family involved, and his daughter and his wife and his son, and all the lines are so blurred that it's just like, nobody should be even acting in those games probably in that way, because it's just going to be corrosive to your very self. And that's why, you know, as Phlebas talked about in that one video, you know, you got to be careful with this stuff because the acting online can impact the acting in real life. And so, hey, let's give MJ his due, even though you're going to stay banned. You know, there's a nice thing about having an unsuccessful YouTube channel. Again, it allows my self-indulgence to be a selfish YouTuber. And again, I know there are many more smaller channels than mine, and when I say that I'm a small channel, then they feel a little bad because they're smaller still. But it doesn't mean they're smaller in my minds, quite frankly, because the truth is that the longer you play with this YouTube algorithm, the more that you realize that there's no there in a lot of ways. Yeah, the big channel can afford you opportunity and stuff, but and this is where I think, you know, I really appreciate a lot of what Jordan Hall says and others like him, that basically they get to a point and they're like, yeah, so what? I got invited to those places. I had those conversations. And the truth is that I often find in randos and people of low status and people who the world doesn't know and probably never will know, that they're often people I prefer to spend more time with because they have real families and they're genuine and they're honest and they're not sort of distracted by all these other games. And so I think that's sort of the beauty of this corner. And I know some people want it to do this or do that or impact politics or change the course of something or something like that. And I just always sort of, as Jacob commented when I pulled him into the T-Grog, I just sort of leave that to God. And Jacob finds that, you know, maybe irresponsible on my part. I can live. If there's one thing that maybe you haven't learned about me is that I can live with your disappointments. That's sort of what happens the older you get, that you see a few things and it's like, yeah, I appreciate that. I hear you, but I'm still going to do what I'm going to do. So, yeah, and maybe this was a self-indulgent video like the owls are not what we think. Maybe I'll have to play that branding at the end of this too. But, yeah, just wanted to make this public service announcement that I don't think T-Rog is going to change with any of this straightforward logic. That would be a performative contradiction, as John Vervaeke calls them, because that's what I've learned, that the aspirational vision of the facts and logic people is that if I lay everything down in sort of a systematic way, then they'll be changed. But that's not what I believe at all. Because what I've seen with people is that you can lay things down with facts and logic and that will influence people. It doesn't not get traction. But it is, just like Jonathan and John noted, that's an aspirational vision that over the big scheme of things really doesn't pay out. Now that, of course, forces people to ask questions like, well, what does change people? Well, I think what actually does change people is real relationships with skin in the game through the ups and downs of life. Yeah, but you might say, well, there's way too many variables to control that. And I would say you're right. And another name for that? That would be the spirit of a providential God. Because there are way too many variables to change. And so God knows, not me. So if you want something to happen, might as well pray about it. I don't know that facts and logic are going to change it. And that doesn't mean, again, that there's not many things in this world that we can't do. And it doesn't mean, if I believe that arguments made no difference at all, I wouldn't have thousands of videos of making arguments and talking to you. But I think that it's much more. So here, the cognitive scientist with a PhD, who has the high status job at University of Toronto, who's got 100,000 plus YouTube subs and has written many books and many articles. And again, T. Grogan won't want to believe him at all because John Vervaeke is not saying what T. Grog wants to hear. Again, another performative contradiction, but again, it's not the system I believe in, it's your system. But what he says here, I think, is much closer to the case of what I've seen in the world, the data that I have perceived.
Which is contrary to the typical atheist story that people are religious because they're not capable of good analytic reflective thought. That's not what drives what religion people take up, or whether, or if they become atheists or not, contrary to what we like to tell ourselves in our own ego-stroking autobiographies. What is the most overwhelming predictor, and it's not poverty or other things we've been told since the Enlightenment, the overwhelming predictor is, what are the people in your life that you regard as credible? And this has a specific meaning, which means they do what are called credibility-enhancing displays, which is the following. They do something that you don't understand, but because you trust them and you've seen their wisdom, you are willing to imitate them to see if they can open your eyes to something. And before you think that's stupid, that's how kids work. Because that's our biggest advantage over chimps, is we trust our adults way more. And that's how come we're capable of culture. So what predicts what your kids will be is the degree to which you do credibility-enhancing displays that they don't initially understand, but they are willing to imitate because they trust and love you, that will actually form them. That is my scientific answer to you.
We've only got a...
And I think parents know this, pastors know this. We sort of grab the facts and logic thing, but what John just said right there, it's like, of course. And so what game do I want to play? I want to play the game of love and trust. That's the game I want to play. Now, can I play that game on the ice of the internet? I don't know. That's what we're sort of figuring out. But again, I know making this argument, hearing the PhD won't settle it. I get it. That's what my system says. That's what my map says. It won't settle it. So I may have wasted this video. But then again, as I've said many times, I'm a very selfish YouTuber. I make the videos that I want to make. So here I am. Leave a comment. No, this won't stop Tim from doing what he does, and maybe Tim will just get finally frustrated with me and walk away, which that's a well-trodden path, Tim. That's a well-trodden path. Many have gotten very frustrated with me and walked away in real life and on the internet. And it's not something I seek, but it's something I accept because you have agency and you don't have to watch my videos, but you are welcome here. And it's just that when you keep throwing the basketballs on the ice rink, sometimes people will pick them up and throw them at your head. That's just the way that goes. So don't complain when the play gets a little rough. Okay, leave a comment.
just king, great king. People error, people king, big, just king, king. Happy, many down, many jack, king from right. Just new king, big, great, can new, happy. The owls are not what they seem. The owls, people very just king, great king. People error, people king, big, just king, king. Happy, many down, many jack, king from right. Just new king, big, great, can new, happy. The owls are not what they seem. The owls are not what they seem. The owls, people very just king, great king. People error, people king, big, just king, king. King, happy, many down, many jack, king from right. Just new king, big, great, can new, happy. The owls are not what they seem. The owls.
All right, that one's a little self-indulgent.